contributor to that mix?
I was able to resolve a partial major contributor. That major contributor matched the DNA profile from Bo Schenecker.
And what was the statistical significance or frequency of occurrence for that profile?
The frequency of occurrence of the major DNA profile from the right-hand swab was 1 in 1 quadrillion Caucasians, 1 in 33 quadrillion African Americans, and 1 in 1.7 quadrillion Southeastern Hispanics.
Thank you. And finally, let's turn to your work on the wristwatch removed from the defendant upon her arrest, FDLE item number 9. Were you able to develop a DNA profile from a swabbing from what you've designated as Area B, as in boy, from that wristwatch?
Yes, I obtained a mixed DNA profile from the Area B of the wristwatch.
And what were you able to determine?
I was not able to break that particular mixture down into a major or minor contributor. However, I compared all 3 of these standards to that mixture. Bo Schenecker and Kalik Schenecker could be included in that mixture, and no determinations could be made to Julie Schenecker.
And were you able to determine a frequency of occurrence or statistical significance of the mixture that was consistent with or could include Bo and Kalik Schenecker?
Yes, the combined frequency of occurrence of the mixed DNA profile that I obtained from the wristwatch, Area B, was 1 in 12 million Caucasians, 1 in 1.7 billion African Americans, and 1 in 24 million Southeastern Hispanics.
Thank you. Nothing further. Cross-examined, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Nielsen, I want to ask you just a few general questions before I ask you specific ones. What exactly do you use for presumptive testing? I know I saw a reference to something called Kastle-Meyer. What is a Kastle-Meyer test, or what does that include? What is it about?
The Kastle-Meyer test is also known as a phenolphthalein test. It's the presumptive test we use for the possible presence of blood. It's a chemical that we add to the sample. If blood is present, we get a bright pink color change. If there's no color change, that's a negative result.
In terms of the Kastle-Meyer test or any other presumptive test, is it always going to include some form of liquid, like you mentioned?
Yes, most of our presumptive tests are a liquid chemical.
With respect to the spiral notebook, I know that your testimony earlier was that eventually your analysis led to a cutting from one of the pages, or maybe on at least one of the pages, you had a cutting from there. You know, it's paper. It wasn't even brand new paper. Is there any kind of safeguard that you install or utilize in order to make sure that the phenolphthalein doesn't, in some fashion or other, contaminate or actually destroy what you think might be a blood stain?
Yes.
What do you have to do there?
I will actually take a small swabbing of the stain and try to get some of the staining onto the swab. I'll then add my chemicals to that swab as opposed to the actual item, so that the chemical is on the swab and does not interfere with the actual item of evidence.
So you actually do it in some fashion or other, possibly reverse what you might normally do if you had a better surface and a lot of the substance available.
For the actual Kastle-Meyer test, I always take a swabbing of the item and then perform my test directly on the swab.
And what kind of liquid do you use for swabbing, or what kind of material do you use for swabbing?
We use cotton swabs, and I add a sterile deionized water to that swab to moisten it to transfer the stain.
Is there any kind of protocol that needs to be followed with respect to the amount of the fluid or liquid on the swab?
The protocol just calls for 1 to 2 drops of the water onto the swab.
What would happen if you did more or less?
The testing would still work. We don't use more so that we don't saturate the item that we're trying to swab. We just use enough to just basically moisten the swab a small amount to transfer the item or the staining.
I wanted to ask something else, again, a general question based on your earlier testimony. You mentioned something about a partial profile as compared to a complete profile. And I think you mentioned, and I want to ask you to clear this up for me, is there any possibility that a partial profile can result for a question sample?
Yes, a partial profile can happen in any type of sample.
And what would be different about the question sample as compared to a known sample when it comes to a determination of a partial profile?
In either a known or a question sample, a partial profile is just a profile where I obtain information at less than the 13 complete areas.
If you, for example, had a profile that you found at 8 loci or locations, and another one you found at 4, you would expect there to be more robust numbers from the 8 locations rather than the 4?
For the statistical purposes,
Correct.
For a match to an 8 loci or areas would be a more discriminating statistic or a larger number. The less areas I have, the smaller the number will be.
As a general question regarding DNA analysis, I take it, we'll strike that. In this particular case, all the stains that you've been talking about this morning are blood stains, correct?
They all give chemical indications for the presence of blood, yes.
Right. In other words, you weren't looking at touch DNA, like what would happen if I put my hand on this surface. You were looking for the possibility of blood, correct?
Correct, yes.
When you initially got this case, were you in communication with any of the people from the Tampa Police Department to give you kind of an idea of what may have happened?
I obtained a case tracking form that is submitted with the items that gives me a brief description of what occurred so that I know what I'm looking for on the items.
Would you have, based on what you got from the case tracking form, is that what kind of got you on the path to look for blood samples to begin with?
That combined with when I opened the items, I observed areas of staining. Even if the case didn't necessarily say that blood could be present and I saw a stain that looked like it could be blood, I would still perform that test just to ensure.
And what about the reverse of that? What if the case tracking form did not say anything about touch DNA, like I had referred to earlier? In this case, did you look for any touch DNA, or did you do any analysis or testing for that?
The only item that I looked for touch DNA was on the gun. I took a swab of the grip of the gun.
Okay, so with respect to the revolver or the gun, did you find any touch DNA, anything that wasn't blood-based?
I obtained limited DNA results from the swab from the gun from the grip, which was area F. These were insufficient for inclusion, but were suitable to exclude someone. I did compare all 3 standards, and no determinations could be made for Bo, Kalix, and Julie Schenecker.
So what you came up with from your examination of the revolver regarding touch DNA was largely inconclusive as to all 3 of the known samples?
Correct, yes.
The other general question I was going to ask you, isn't it true that you can't tell by DNA analysis exactly when a substance was left on the surface you're looking at?
Yes, that is correct.
So, for example, any of the stains that you noticed, the blood stains that you noticed, they could have been left there a week ago or a year ago or 5 minutes ago. You wouldn't be able to tell unless maybe they were still in some more liquefied form.
That is correct. I would not be able to tell how long the stain was present on the item.
Okay. I want to ask you about the product rule. Is there any kind of a plus or minus factor regarding the product rule? I know that's the rule you use. That's part of the thing I guess you all inherited that from the FBI initially?
It is part of the FBI guidelines as well as recommended in the NRC documents.
Okay. Is there any kind of a plus or minus factor that you're aware of that corresponds to the product rule?
The plus or minus factor actually refers to the use of a database. Between different databases, my calculations could have a difference of up to plus or minus tenfold.
In your situation, you don't create the database, correct?
Correct.
You just utilize one, and which one do you currently utilize?
For this testing, I use the FBI database.
How many databases are you personally aware of that exist out there?
There are lots. I am unaware of exactly how many there are.
And depending on which database you use, you would have some plus or minus factor regarding the total statistical analysis you've come up with, in other words, the numbers that you earlier testified about?
Correct, yes.
Is this part of the SOP or protocol of your particular, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement lab, that you all are going to always use that particular database that you just talked about a second ago?
Yes, for the testing I performed, that was the database that we used.
You don't have any discretion as a lab analyst within the framework of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to pick your own database, correct?
No, I cannot.
So you're locked into using the FBI database, and there are others that are out there, but that's the one you used.
Yes, for this testing, that is the one that I used.
And that's the one, even if you got another case tomorrow morning and you started working on it, you would still be using the same database, correct? Or have y'all switched?
We are using a different database now because we now test for 15 areas instead of 13, and the database, the FBI database, did not include those 2 additional areas.
Do you know who generated the new database?
Yes, it was generated by John Butler in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and it was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences.
Okay, so now you would be using a different database based on a little bit more advancement in DNA analysis?
Yes, for the additional areas that we test now.
So back in 2011, when you did the testing in this, you guys were using the FBI database, which was for the 13 locations?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I noticed by looking at the report and also from your earlier testimony that the statistical analysis would be exactly the same. For example, from the pocket of the robe, the tissues from the pocket of the robe, which I believe was your 5A, and the profile obtained from the spiral notebook, which I think was your 10B, area 1, that's where you found in both of those instances that there was a major profile related to my client, Julie Schenecker, correct?
Yes, those 2 profiles match the profile from Julie Schenecker.
Right, and those 2, when you applied the product rule for the database that the FBI, that you were using back in 2011, you came up with the exact same numbers for both of them. Is there any, and I noticed that in other instances in which you found DNA from Bo Schenecker in more than one location, or Kalik Schenecker in more than one location, the database, the product rule, and the database that it was coming from came up with the same numbers for those 2. Is that just by coincidence, or is that related specifically to the person and the kind of profile you determined?
That is based on the fact that the 2 profiles that I performed the statistics on were the exact same. They had the same amount of information. They were the same profile, and so therefore the statistics were exactly the same.
So that's the case with respect to the tissues from the pocket area of the robe and the spiral notebook. That's one pairing that came up exactly the same, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's also the same for the robe areas B, D, and F, as well as the revolver area E, and the robe 5C, which you came up with the exact same numbers there as well, correct?
Yes, that's
And those
correct.
are the ones I think were related to Kalik Schenecker.
Yes.
And the final one that I noticed, and there may have been more in here, but robe area 5, area E, and the fixed bullet from the van that came back to Bo Schenecker, those came up with the exact same numbers after the product rule was applied?
Yes.
Judge, could I have a moment, please?
Yes, sir.
Judge, I don't have any other questions.
Redirect.
No further questions, thank you.
May this witness be excused.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Judge.
Ma'am, you may step down and you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call your next witness. Detective Gary Sandow.
step up, sir. You've been sworn in this proceeding. I'll remind you your oath.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Detective, on January 28th of 2011, did you go to the scene of the deaths of Calix and Bo Schenecker, the Schenecker home in Royal Palms?
Yes, sir, I did.
What was your purpose for actually going to the scene?
I was called by the sergeant that was on duty, our Sergeant Hinkle at the time, gave me some brief information and basically sent me out there to be lead detective and see what was going on at the scene.
Did it, as the lead detective, does it assist you to see the environment or location of the deaths of possible homicide victims?
Yes.
And among other things, is that what you were doing at that scene?
Yes.
Did other members of the Tampa Police Department Homicides Squad obtain a court-authorized search warrant so that the home could be thoroughly searched for potential evidence?
Yes, sir.
At the time you were first at the Schenecker home, was the defendant still at the residence?
Yes, sir.
Where was she when you first saw the defendant?
I believe by the time I got there, she was by one of the patrol officers' vehicles. I believe the door was open and she was sitting in the vehicle.
At some point, did you make a determination that you wanted to interview the defendant?
Yes, sir.
And as a result of that determination, did you have close contact with the defendant outside the homicide scene?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Just standing by the patrol car, just told the patrol unit or the officer that was going to transport that we would take her to 411 for the interview. I don't recall her really making any statement or saying anything to me at that time.
Okay.
Just told her that we were going to go downtown for an interview, and
All right.
that was about it.
And was she clothed in a white robe and pajamas?
Yes, sir.
And ultimately was Ms. Schenecker transported to the Tampa Police Department for an interview?
Yes, sir.
Where is the homicide division located within the Tampa Police Department?
It's at 411 Franklin Street, downtown. It's on the 8th floor.
Okay. At some point during the course of your investigation, I'm kind of switching gears on you, did you determine that the defendant had purchased a .38 revolver Smith & Wesson brand from a business called Lock and Load in Oldsmar, Florida?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Not to receive, no. It wasn't doing anything. Yes.
All right, Detective Sandell, during the course of your investigation, did you come to learn that State's Exhibit number 20, 38, previously identified as a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, had been found at the scene by Officer Noble?
Yes.
Okay. And during the course of your investigation, did you learn from other people involved in the investigation that State's Exhibit number 19D, a receipt from Lock and Load in the name of Julie Schenecker with serial numbers corresponding to that firearm had been found in a brown woman's purse on the counter of the kitchen of the Schenecker home?
Yes, sir.
What conclusion did you draw from that item, the gun, and the receipt as a trained investigator?
That she had purchased it, and looking at the timeline, it was obvious that there was, a gap in time when this occurred and when the purchase had occurred.
Okay, thank you. So, having drawn that conclusion at some point in your investigation, did you, at my request, travel to Lock and Load?
Yes, on several occasions.
Okay. Well, several at my request, or one at my request and others at your own?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And did you become familiar with the physical location of that Lock and Load address in Oldsmar?
Yes, sir.
And were you, did you become familiar with the location of the Schenecker home in Tampa Palms as a result of your part of this investigation?
Yes, sir.
Let me show you what I've marked for identification as State's Exhibit number 96. Do you recognize this as a partial map of portions of Hillsborough County and the adjoining county to our west, Pinellas County?
Yes, sir.
And does this exhibit accurately contain the relative locations of the Schenecker home in Tampa Palms and the location of Lock and Load in Oldsmar?
Yes, sir.
You argue State's 96 in the evidence?
No objection, Judge.
Receive without objection.
May the witness step down, sir.
You may step down, sir. Counsel, if you need to move so you can see, go ahead.
Now, that's a little uneven, but that'll be fine. At my request, did you drive from the Schenecker home to Lock and Load to determine an approximate distance?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe for the jury, and demonstrate using your fingers if you need to, but also verbalize the course of travel you took between the two locations?
When I traveled, obviously I went to the crime scene and traveled Bruce B. Downs to where it turns into 30th Street down to Bush Boulevard. I went west on Bush Boulevard, then I went south on Himes to Hillsborough, and then went west on Hillsborough all the way into Oldsmar. Hillsborough Avenue, when you go west past Racetrack Road, turns into Tampa Road.
Okay. And traveling that route, what was the distance between the 2 points?
Approximately 27 miles one way.
Now, that's not the only path you could have taken, is that correct? That's just an example?
Yes, that's the path I took that day, but I'm sure there's probably 20 other ways to go. But it was approximately 27 miles one way.
Now, how long have you been working as a homicide detective in Hillsborough County?
7 years.
And unfortunately, as a result of that experience, did you become familiar with the locations within Hillsborough County from which an individual can purchase a firearm?
Yes.
Were there any locations within Hillsborough County in 2011 from which firearms were sold that were closer to the Schenecker home than Lock and Load in Oldsmar, Pinellas County?
Yes, there were probably 10 or more en route to Oldsmar, I would say, more than 10.
In 2011, were there any Hillsborough County ordinances that prohibited the sales of firearms to an otherwise qualified individual?
No.
Okay, thank you. Please take your seat. Did you conduct an interview with the defendant, Julie Schenecker, on January 28th of 2011?
Yes, sir, I did.
And where did that interview occur?
In one of the main conference rooms up on the 8th floor in the homicide division.
Why was it you chose that location?
Comfortability. Seats are more comfortable. There's more room. It was going to be myself, Detective Prebich, and the defendant, so just chose that room for comfort, a bigger room.
Can you give us an idea of the size of the room?
It's probably 15 by 20, 15 by 25. It's a fairly large room with a big table and chairs all around it.
What are the normal uses for that room?
When we have squad meetings at that time, there's like maybe 8 or 10 of us that would attend. It was just more comfortable for that many people to sit at a table. But for interviews specifically, we would use it quite a bit.
Right. Did you audio record your interview with the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Was any other detective present during the interview of the defendant on that date?
Yes, Detective Prebich.
Okay. During the course of the interview, was the defendant advised of her constitutional rights?
Yes, sir.
And is that also captured on the audio recording?
Yes, it is.
Was there a form that was used to assist in the reading of the defendant's constitutional rights?
Yes, sir.
I show you what's been marked for identification. It states in Exhibit 85.
Judge, can we approach this point?
Yes, sir. Showing you what's been marked for identification is states exhibit number 85. You recognize that exhibit, sir?
Yes, sir.
And what do you recognize that exhibit to be?
It's a Form 310 that on the top has Miranda warnings, and it's the one that was used the day of the interview.
Thank you. I move states 85 into evidence.
Previously stated objection, I'll rely on Judge.
Proceed.
Thank you. Now, the interview of the defendant that was audio recorded was that reduced and duplicated onto 3 separate discs?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and have you, let me show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit number 86. Do you recognize that composite exhibit as being comprised of the 3 separate discs of the audio interview of the defendant on January 28th of 2011?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, may we approach briefly on one issue? Okay, Detective, I may have asked you this, but may have forgotten. Yeah, the 3 discs comprising State Exhibit number 96, have you listened to each of those discs?
Yes, sir, I have.
And do you recognize each of those discs by your initials that you placed upon each of the 3 different discs?
Yes, sir.
And with the exception of a minor redaction, do each of those discs fairly and accurately contain the recording of the entirety of the interview that you and Detective Krevich conducted of the defendant on September 28th of 2011?
Yes, sir, they do.
Your Honor, I review State's Exhibit number 86 into evidence.
Counsel.
There's no previously stated objection, stand.
Noted, overruled. State's 86 for identification is received as State's Exhibit 86.
Your Honor, at the appropriate time, the state would move to publish or play the disc to the jury and provide to them proposed transcripts to assist them in their listening of the jury, of the discs.
All right. Okay, thank you, counsel. And what I'm going to do, I'm aware of the time and how long you've been sitting there. So this is my determination of the appropriate time to go ahead and give you a break. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and make it the lunch break. So let's go ahead and have everyone back. We'll set that return time to be, it's about 11:35. We'll make it 12:50 p.m. And you know when you come back, that back now means for you to go through the doors straight into courtroom 53A, where you assemble the jury room so we can proceed. You know, I'm going to remind you as we take this lunch break about those important instructions, not to discuss this case among yourselves, not to discuss it with anyone else, not to allow anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. Remember, anyone attempts to say anything to you or in your presence about this case, that's when you tell them you're on the jury. Tell them to immediately stop. If they persist, you leave them at once as soon as possible. You tell the bailiff, who in turn will advise me. I'll remind you this case must be tried based upon the evidence presented in this courtroom, in your presence and the presence of the attorneys, the defendant, and the judge. You're not to conduct any investigation on your own, not to visit any places that may have been described in the evidence, not to read nor listen to any reports about this case from any source whatsoever, not to speak at all with the attorneys, the witnesses, or the defendant about any subject until your deliberations are finished, and not to do any research, gather information, or communicate about this case or the people or places involved or your jury service through any means, including all those electronic devices. With that reminder of important instructions, we'll see you after lunch.
All right.
You can be seated. Our jury's exited the courtroom. The door is closed. Detective Sandell, I'm going to instruct you not to discuss this case or your testimony with anyone until you return to the stand, and we'll have you back at 12:50 as well. Okay, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Anything can you say or finish what we do with this one?
Just that it's my intent to address the stipulation matter between Detective Sandell's testimony and the following witness.
All right. I understand. And I take it you wish to take that up when we return at 12:50, is that correct?
No, sir, after his testimony is when I would propose to pre-publication.
All right. And that provides to you, hopefully, the time that you indicated you wish to discuss that matter.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Y'all will raise that with me when you're ready.
Yes, sir.
See you after lunch break.